Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Monday live stream. I'm Breach Burke, and you'll notice I'm in a different place today. I'm actually upstairs in my house. It's funny, I had a morning where my neighbor is home today, and unfortunately she seems to be home on Mondays, which are my day off. But she was outside deciding to do her leaves at the same time I was doing my leaves. There's a ton of them. I spent almost 2 hours, and I still have a lot to do, but I cleaned up all the main places, but I noticed she's out there doing it now. So I was like, you know what? Otherwise, you're going to hear this hum of her leaf blower in the background. So I was like, let me just do it upstairs. And it's fine because this is where I was set up for, welcome. So I was already set up here for my morning live stream, which I do every day on my other channel. So I thought, okay, let me just do this here. I'll just do it up in my room rather than change everything around. So here we are at noon, and it is the 4th of November. And of course, if you're in the USA, there's an election going on. Early voting started a little over a week ago. I want to say it was the 26th of October. And I know I voted early, and the lines were insane for voting early. Ultimately, what that means, who knows? I've been doing a whole lot lately about my theme of my morning live stream was kind of this idea that right now everything, and then of course Mercury's going to get to go retrograde. Hello, welcome, Kelsey. We're going to have this. We're kind of in this space right now where it's very difficult to know what's true and what's not true in terms of what's being presented in the media about this election. I guess there's certain polling that's being done, but with polls, it's very interesting because there's apparently a lot that's being messed up lately with that. There's been interference with the polls. There's been bots flooding polls with certain information that may or may not be correct. I mean, I heard this from a legitimate pollster. And now, I guess what they're doing is they're doing exit polls, like people after they voted, like saying, oh, like, who do you vote for? And so that kind of thing. But okay, regardless, I promise you this is not going to turn into a political live stream. But it is really interesting because, the way the collective is right now, they're making it seem like, oh my God, everything's neck and neck, and it's going to be, it's going to be a real big face off, and it's going to be so close. And I just don't think that's going to be the case at all. But again, that's my opinion, right? I'm going to add to the social media opinion sphere, right? So, but the whole election thing got me thinking again about, and I know I did a live stream on this, I think back in March, but I did one on Eris, goddess of chaos, and our favorite Principia, Discordia. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today. But the first thing I actually want to do is go over, I did this on Patreon, and I want to kind of go over what Chthonia is doing right now. Because now there is a whole lot of activity going on at Chthonia. There's a ton of stuff going on. So I want to share that with you guys first, because I think it would be interesting, and maybe some people will be interested in the things that are going on. So I just want to make sure that I'm sharing that here. And okay, so let me just kind of look at the master list that I have here, because I have everything written down. I sat down, I had one of those, I don't know if you want to call it a mental download, or if you want to call it just like a mental, mental vomiting, whatever it is. It was just like, I sat down last night thinking, oh my God, here's everything that needs to be done between November and December. Some of it's on Chthonia, some of it's on my coaching side, my personal coaching side, which is on transition life coaching. But there's kind of this, there tends to be an overlap between some of the content between the two places. So I'm going to kind of mention both. And that's what I was realizing today. I happened to log into my account, my university account, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got like 80 papers to grade. So you know what I'm doing this afternoon. Okay. So I guess the first thing, Chthonia books. Let me talk about that first. I've been doing a Chthonia Books Week here on Instagram, and you've probably seen that. Like every day I've been featuring another book that's in the catalog. And I did 7 days and 7 books, and I guess, yeah, that's pretty much what it is right now. There's 7. There's 5 fiction books of mine, including 1 short story. Actually, probably, let's see, okay. Out of the 7, technically 5 are published by Chthonia Books. 1 is published by Amazon's Create Space, because I did that before I started Chthonia Books as an imprint. And then there's, and most of them are mine. One of them is by Ellen Jones, who's on here on Instagram as @SpiralPriestess, one word. And she did her Cunning Person's Poetry Apothecary, and I think I featured that one yesterday. But I featured all of my books, and I just put up Death and the Maiden today, because even though that one's technically not Chthonia Books, that's published by an academic publisher called Algora. So that one is out, but it is a book that I present on my webpage so that people, because it is actually the basis of the Chthonia theme. So that's the academic work. But I have a lot of fiction works, and I have the 1 short story collection. And then I have Ellen's collection of poetry on there. I do actually have a place on my website for people who want to submit works to me. Now, again, Chthonia is not, like a lot of independent publishers, it's not like we're huge here. It's not like there's we're New York Times bestseller list kind of stuff, if that's what people are aiming for. But I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that on this live stream as well, with regard to creativity. But in any case, people who are looking for a really wider mainstream audience, obviously that wouldn't be the imprint for them. But people who have like kind of a project that they're like, yeah, I would like to put that out. I do have the mechanisms for putting that out. And, ordering copies. And again, most of it's sold. You can buy it on Amazon. Usually you can order Chthonia Books titles through bookstores as well, because they are being distributed through a major distributor. But the kickback from that is not very big. I was just, noticing like 8 copies of a book that's $10. So that's $80, right? That the actual return on that was something like $15, So because by the time you paid the, the retailer gets a 50% discount, and then Ingram takes the printing fees out of that. So it's not, and if you don't do the 50% discount, then a lot of times they say retailers won't actually carry your stuff. So yeah, and I understand that too. There's the idea of making profit and so forth, but but it's an interesting business there. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to be ordering some of the titles. I can get them obviously in bulk as the publisher from the distributor. And I'm not going to be getting a whole lot. I'm not going to be getting 50 copies of every title or something. But I'm going to have some titles available as we're getting into the holiday season, because there's a lot of people who are telling me, yeah, this is the time when, if I'm going to sit down and do my reading, this is when I'm going to do it. And also, with the holidays and stuff, not everybody celebrates Christmas. I know I sort of do at this point. To me, it's more of a winter holiday, but people are looking to buy things for people at this point, or things that maybe they've wanted to get. So, I want to make some copies available that I can ship to people, because some people are like, oh, I don't want to go through Amazon. Can I just buy it through you? So I'm going to have some copies available. So I'm going to be placing an order for that. And the other piece of news is that I'm going to have a new Chthonia Books title. And I haven't entirely decided what it's going to be called yet. Right now, kind of the working title is the Azrael Initiation. But I don't know. It's kind of one of those things that's quasi, because like I said, my work with Archangel Azrael, just like with the Morrigan, I've done a lot of work where she's come through as kind of a personality and has become a character, this Layla character that's in at least three of my books. And again, it's not to say, you have to be careful when you say character. I think a lot of times when we look at fiction, we think, oh, what's real and what's not real, and how much of this the authentic mythology and the authentic this and that. This is the personality that presents itself. And it's just writing about the personality. I'm not making any historical claims, and I'm not necessarily making any kind of, authoritative gatekeeping claims about any of these, goddesses or figures. And same with Azrael. Azrael's presenting himself as a personality. I was talking on my other live stream this morning I got a Enochian message. Well, he doesn't call it Enochian, but that's what most people know it as, the angelic language. And actually I have it written down. It's Deugir ge lula fai boharug, which is basically Enochian for your strength in art is from the voices that I planted. So, and I've mentioned this in a couple of different places, but yeah, so there's this that kind of came through to me this morning, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, because I have a story that's being written. It's kind of a Hades Persephone kind of rework, but it's going to be a little different because Azrael has kind of taken over my Hades like character. So we'll see where that ends up. But that should be a new novel that comes out in the beginning of the year. Now on the book front again, I have Morrigan, Phantom Queen, my book on the Morrigan. Speaking of the Morrigan, the academic work. Now, Theon, I've noticed, has just published the new Lilith book, which is not mine. It's called She of the Night, and so that one is going to be available through them. That looks like it's really good. Like, they spent the year making it into a really nice publication in terms of presentation, illustration, and so forth. So, and then also they published an essay by Harper Feist on Hecate. So those actually look really, really good. So people might want to go over to Theon Publishing and check that out. I'll probably actually post about it here today because I just think they're interesting works for anyone interested in the dark feminine. And the authors are certainly people who are worth reading. And there was something, I remember Jessica telling me David Beth had some kind of an essay or something he was trying to complete. So I saw that he had put an essay as kind of an introduction to some work, and I didn't, and to be fair, I didn't delve too deeply into the post, but I guess the net result of that is that so the net result of that is that it's really, sorry, I just had my mind just went for a minute. The net result is that I think that they're caught up on everything that was supposed to come out before Morrigan Timeline. Not Morrigan Timelines, Phantom Queen. Yeah, like I said, I'm like, as you're going to see, I have been relentlessly busy, and my mind is like, some days I'm sharp and some days I'm not. I'm not sure this is a sharp day. Probably not a great day to be grading papers, but anyway, it is what it is. So I think that might be the next book that's coming out from them, is my book, finally, but I have not actually heard from them. So I will let you know again, but I'm mentioning it because I'm like, okay, this just seems, based on what I heard was in the pipeline for them, I feel like probably early 2025, or in the first half of 2025 anyway, it seems like Phantom Queen may finally come out. So, yeah. So anyway, there's that I'm working on. So yeah, that's your Chthonia books update. That's the kind of publication update of everything I'm working on in terms of writing and everything that might be coming out. Now, we are also at the point in the year where I think I've got 4 podcasts left for 2024. And I'm going to be moving into a space where, obviously, I have to come up with the 2025 list. And I've got about 7 figures that I'm going to be addressing as of right now, based on requests that I've had over on the my YouTube channel, from Patreon, and from different places. I've gotten people who have written to me and said, hey, have you covered this figure or that figure? And off the top of my head, I feel like the requests were for Hermaphroditos was one, because I had done I had done another figure with respect to Aegis. That's who it was. And they said, well, if you're going to do Aegis, are you also going to do Hermaphroditus? So and I got 2 requests for that, so I'm going to make sure I do that. I'm going to be doing La Loba. That's another one that was requested through Patreon. I'm going to be doing... trying to think who else was on my list. Somebody actually asked that I cover Lugh, the Celtic god Lugh, because I talk about the Morrigan, and I talk about Macha, and they said, can you say something about Lugh? And just like, I've done Dionysus before, so I do occasionally do male figures on this podcast, so Lugh is on the list from that. And I feel like there was one more, but I also noticed, speaking of goddess Eris, that I haven't covered Eris. I wanted to cover Chthonia, which is another aspect of Hecate. And there was one that I had, I think it's a sister of Queen Maeve. I think I have her on my list from this year, but I'm not going to get to her. I've got the last 4 planned for this year. The next one's going to be on the Selkies. That's going to be next week. And I do have an extra Patreon podcast in the works, but this week I just do not think, with everything else going on, that I'm going to get to it. There is a new remaster up. I remastered Hecate Part 1, and I literally just posted about that before I got on the live stream. It took ages to do because it was not just, because the swallowing thing, I was like, why is it so loud on here? I mean, it still happens occasionally when I'm recording. It's the same piece of equipment. But somehow, it just really was loud. I was like, why is it so loud? It was bizarre. So... but also there were some places where my voice was really, really low. And it's like you have like this juxtaposition between these two things. It was really annoying to listen to. So it took me like 3 hours of editing just for that episode. So I'm going to try to get Hecate Part 2 up, and I'm also going to try to get the Persephone one done. I have Night Hag and Night Hag Syndrome, which was one of my early ones. I want to get that done as well and get that up. So yeah, I'm trying to work through it slowly. But the idea is that when, I'm at a point where I'm like, I do need some days off. I do need some days to just recharge my batteries. And that's why I think I'm falling behind on certain things. So I can only go too far, so far behind. But I'm going to try to work those in the next, couple of months and try to get the 2019 catalog back up and remastered. But Hecate Part 1 is now up for people who are interested and people who didn't like it with all the... whatever sounds were in there, that's all been edited out now. So it actually should be a much easier listen for people who were put off by that. Okay. Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth. I'm going to mention that as well because we are now almost all the way through the coursework. We started with Joanna Madlock giving a witch imagery and fairy tales. And she gave a talk on Baba Yaga in particular, but she also kind of went through, the idea of the concept of the witch, what is the witch, and the concepts of tricksters and trickster archetypes and things. So that was a really interesting lecture and seminar. Dr. Kate Kinsbury gave a talk on Santa Muerte and La Llorona, and also on the plight of Mexican women and, Mexican women as death workers, which is a lot of what her academic work is centered around. So she gave a really excellent lecture on that a couple weeks ago. And then because she had to go to Mexico, I actually went and did the seminar for her. So we had a seminar where we went over and we discussed things. And then I gave my lecture this past week on Hecate and Persephone and feminine life cycle initiation myths. And that's part of the reason why I'm choosing Hecate and Persephone to rework first, so that my students have access to that. But so far, the people who have been in the courses have said to me, "Oh my gosh, this is like mind blowing. This is like," a lot of them have said that they've written to me later and they're like, "Wow, that whole session was like just mind blowing." So there's a lot of really good stuff going on at the ISFM. And I'm going to be putting the 2025 spring schedule together soon. I need to find out who wants to come back as a teacher. There may be some new people who I'm adding on as teachers. So, working through that. So, I will have that information up probably much sooner than I did this time. I do have at least one repeat student who wants to take spring 2025, and we will see where we go with that. I mean, I still have and hello, Joanne. It's just so funny. I was just talking about you. I was just talking about the ISFM, and we've got one more set of lectures with Dr. Max Orsini, and again, people are perfectly welcome to audit the lecture and the seminar. I do have a price for that. That's not the full semester price. And then if people want to get recordings of any of these things, I also have a price on there for people who want to get recordings, and I will send you the link for those recordings. Okay. So we have this, and Max is going to be talking about literature, the feminine in literature, dark feminine in literature, and poetry in particular. And yeah, every lecturer that I've had has been like a really like superstar kind of person. Like they've been really, really good at presenting and very impactful. So this has been a really, really great starting semester. It's a small start, but to me, it doesn't matter. I don't care that it's small. In fact, it's better that it's small because all the little details that I'm trying to work out, mainly it's technical stuff, with the website and the group and stuff like that, it's been a pain in the neck for both instructors and for students, I think. So I've had to try to sort all that out, and it's better to do it with a small group than with like a huge group of people. So that's going on. And the people who are on my Patreon, who are in the ISFM, and people who have taken classes with me on the other website that I have, Transition Life Coaching, which that's more personal coaching kind of stuff, like intuitive development, tarot workshops, dream workshops, stuff like that. Stuff that has more to do with your own interaction with symbol. I'm going to be having a little winter soiree of some kind. It's going to obviously be virtual, but there was a request, can we get together and have like the sort of the pagan equivalent of what's the holiday party or whatever. So we're going to do something in December with that. And as far as the other stuff that I'm doing, check my other website, transitionlifecoaching.net. So as you can see, it's been very, very busy. I've had a ton of stuff going on, and I just feel like this week I was looking at my list and I'm going, oh my God, I've got grading to do. I've got to prep for Wednesday night's seminar. I've got a book that I'm editing for somebody that's got to be done like very, very soon. And I'm also trying to prep classes and workshops and so forth for going into winter and so forth. And I do Saturday workshops right now in person in the town of Milford. And, and people are requesting other classes and workshops. So so it has been incredibly, incredibly busy, which is why I think I'm like, I have to kind of get my feet on the ground and figure out where I'm at different places. So okay. So those are the updates. And as you can see, we're already at 12:22. That was quite a lot of update, right? So I've talked about this a little bit more on the other live stream, and I'm thinking a little bit about about goddess Eris, okay, and about how Eris is she tends to be this very, very chaotic force. Now, when we think about chaos, okay, so what does chaos mean? What does chaos mean in the culture? There's been a lot of discussion and push around the current culture that we have. And in this culture, there are astrological explanations for things, which I could talk about here, but I think that's more of the kind of thing I talk about on the other channel. But there's definitely a sense here, like one of the things I've even seen among male astrologers is the influence of the dark feminine. Like the dark feminine is coming in and is influencing culture. We've had a culture, they're talking about it kind of as moving out of Pluto and Capricorn. Like Pluto always highlights what the shortcomings are, what the difficulties are, what's in shadow about a particular system. And Capricorn, of course, is about, it's very Chthonia in the sense of, it's been about, it can be about hard work, it can be about persistence, the way in which you have discipline and patience and practice can teach us things. But Saturn can also, like that Capricorn energy can also be earthy to a degree that one gets focused on greed, one gets focused on money, one gets focused only on productivity is the only way in which one should live their lives. And I was having a conversation this morning with Ellen Jones, who actually published the Cunning Person's Poetry Apothecary with me. And she was talking to me. She says, she was thinking about the whole idea of ADHD, right? And so what's the thing with ADHD? Well, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So it's this inability to focus is certainly one of the central difficulties that somebody diagnosed with ADHD deals with. But she had said to me, she says, I wonder when it comes to creativity, whether or not ADHD is that like a disorder, or is it a disorder, or is it really just that you are that this is the way creativity works? that creativity doesn't, it's not meant to be like, oh, okay, well, we're going to start with step one, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. Now, obviously, if you're going to bring an idea into form, it has to have a kind of structure, right? But I think it was kind of with respect to, I was talking to her a little bit about the novel that I'm writing now, because as I said, I start and I finish different novels. Some of them get finished and get published, others don't. And she's like, what is, she said, is there anything wrong with saying, okay, I've picked this up and I've taken it to this, in this direction. And then I've reached a point where I've said, you know what? No, I'm picking up and I'm doing something completely different now and going in a different direction. Okay. So that's the kind of thing that she was talking about. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of it. It's like, I feel like because creativity is something, it's like, where does creativity come from? We talk about it coming from source, or we talk about it coming from something that sounds like it's external to us. Now, again, if you're looking at depth psychology, there's not necessarily a huge line between the internal and the external, although there is sometimes there's a line between what's authentic to us and what society thinks we should be, right? Or what society tells us is the norm or is the thing. But to her point was just that when you talk about ADHD, she's like, or any kind of attention deficit disorder, is it really just that this person is unable to focus, or is it just that that the creativity maybe comes for some, at least for some people, in bursts, that it comes in different things. Now, and what are we disciplining? We're disciplining ourselves to finish something, right? To complete something. And obviously, depending on the context, if you start something, you should finish it, right? But sometimes if you're just writing something more, it's not like there's a purpose to it. We always feel like creativity has to have a purpose. Like, oh, if I'm writing this, then it has to be something that I'm going to, if I'm writing a book, then I have to publish and sell it, right? If I make a piece of art, then there has to be some place or some media where I'm displaying this, right? The idea that we would do it just for ourselves, it almost comes into this space of that's just a luxury. That's just something you're doing in your downtime. That's not the real work that you do, right? That it's somehow there's something not real about it. And so I don't know. I think about this a lot because I spend a lot of time on this. Like I may have a day where I have a full schedule, but then it's like I feel like I have to stop and paint something, or I need to stop and work on this new novel, which has kind of been a thing. I feel like I've kind of been pulled into, you've got 8 million things going on. Sit down and work on this, right? And in my Morrigan book, one of the things I talk about is like acting as a vehicle for the deity, I guess we could say, or for the whoever it is that is inspiring us, I guess. Whatever the muse is, whoever's wanting to interact with us, whatever kind of figure is interacting with us. So with Morrigan for years, a lot of the initial interaction was through creativity. It was through writing stories about her. And again, these stories are not stories that are necessarily true to what you might read in the medieval texts. Some of it is, and some of it isn't. But it's almost like a different personality has emerged. And that personality is more modern in a lot of ways. But then sometimes it's not. It's more like it's something that's trying to make itself understood in this world, but doesn't necessarily always understand how this world works, or it's operating in a way that makes it just very clear that you're not necessarily dealing with something that's human. Like with the Morrigan, that's what I found. Her behavior, there tended to be two different personalities that presented themselves. One is sort of this idea of this betrayed feminine, and the other was this idea of this very very sexualized and extraordinarily independent feminine that went around and did things that were not certainly questionable according to our moral codes, right? But the whole idea was, well, I'm not a person. I'm not interested in moral codes. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get my thing done. So you have these two kinds of things that are presenting themselves, these personalities. And when people try to write works and try to interpret them on some kind of a social level, or about having a message, or about having certain things, I'm like, I think the message is just that, that there's forces around us that morality is not always the be all end all. A lot of people are afraid to write certain kinds of works that they feel might be too triggery, or might be too, it might upset a certain group of people. And I'm like, well, that's not really the point. The point of exploring these things is because they need to be explored. And you may explore it publicly, or you may explore it privately, but you should never censor yourself in that regard. Because, there's going to be an audience. I feel like it always gets to its intended audience, right? But there's the thing about creativity now. And again, I've talked about this repeatedly, but about the way that AI is trying to take over creativity and co-opt it, right? The way that art, AI generated art, AI generated music. I was reading recently about an AI. I'm sure it's not the only one, but there's AI generated bands, where they invent characters and personalities and everything, and AI is the one that's constructed all of it. There can be some interesting experimentation there, but the thing I wonder about is, I said, okay, well, why are you giving your creativity away to a machine? Like, if the machine is something to create an efficiency for us, why is it more efficient? Why is it like, I can't be bothered with creativity because I have to be bothered with productive stuff, or I need to be able to do this fast, or I need to be able to do it on a certain timetable? And that's where I think the problem comes in. Is that because we feel that we have to restrict ourselves very narrowly in terms of manifesting something or creating something, we may think, okay, well, the machine's going to help us do this. But the results are very plastic. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, well, I guess maybe they don't sound like they're generated by a human. There's something about them that comes across that way. Like, if I listen to AI-generated music, even if it seems like AI did a halfway decent job, there's just something about it that doesn't, because it's cannibalizing stuff that's come before. That's how it decides that it's going to write, I don't know, some kind of a song that's very, like I think this band was called Hail Darkness or something, and it was like this kind of /occult /psychedelic it's like somebody threw a bunch of keywords in and it generated music. And they just decided which music they liked and which they didn't. And they said, oh, well, it's curated, so that's still creative. I don't know about that. Because then there's that other side of the Capricornian energy where it's like, yeah, there's the work that you put into it, too. There's the effort that you put in, the time that you take to learn something. Not everything can be done in an instant. We have a kind of instant gratification kind of society. And that's the thing about the creativity, is that there's just certain aspects of creativity that I find that I'm bothered by. And I've talked about this before, and I don't want to be repetitive. I did a live stream on my other channel called Corporate Creativity. But somebody had brought up to me in that live stream, because I was talking about, like in the USA, Thanksgiving's coming up at the end of the month, right? And I always think of the Macy's Parade. Now, the Macy's Parade has a lot of nostalgia for people who live particularly in the Northeast, but I think in the USA, there's always been that. But the more I watch it as I get older, I've stopped watching it because I said, there's something about it that I find repellent. And some people just say, oh, well, you don't want to be that way about it. It's, or I don't know. Not everybody necessarily says that, but some people, some people still get something out of it. And I don't want to take that away from anybody who does. I guess that's the way I want to put it. But I've been finding it more and more repellent because I said there's just something about it. These kinds of pre-recorded, pitch perfected, all these kinds of performances that doesn't feel like it's actually being, it's like I'm watching an animatronic band somewhere, like in Chuck E. Cheese or something. There's this, it's something that doesn't feel real about it. Like there's that uncanniness to it, but not, and in the sense that it is repellent. And somebody said to me on the live stream, they said, well, yeah, that's because what you're listening to is something that's like a corporate production. And that's just what it is. What we're seeing, and I suppose maybe to a certain degree that's always been the case. In popular culture, the things that gain kind of mass popularity are produced in this kind of a lot of people have criticized how artistic they are, whether they're artistic or not. But when something is created with the intention of making money, we're going to create like bands who go into the studio to make an original album, and it's like, well, you have to make this kind of a song because this is what sells, right? Or you need to generate this kind of a thing because this is what people are buying. And when you get caught up in that, that's where I think the difficulty is. When you start saying, I need to generate something that people are going to buy. When that's the intention, then it's no longer about art, and it's more just about capitalism, I guess. It's just about making money. It's about selling a product. And that the idea that that's something that's perfect, that's perfected, that the idea that anything that we do that's not kind of designed with that kind of glossy veneer or glamour over it is somehow not worthy or worthwhile, or somehow is substandard and not very good, and nobody's going to buy that, and you shouldn't waste your time on it. I really take issue with that, because I think that somehow having the rough edges is what shows you that we're still dealing with humanity, that this is still a process. This is still something we're working through. When it's corporate, it's just been kind of put in this neat little package with a pretty picture on it, and that's all that it is. It's all style and no substance, right? There's something about it that you feel there's no depth to it. And again, sometimes it's totally fine to look at things that have no depth. It's not like everything has to be deep. I get it. And people will say that to me. Well, come on, Breach, don't be so freaking... And it's not that I'm trying to be serious about it. It's just that for something to really touch me and say, wow, that really affects me. That's something I really... that's a book I want to reread. That's a piece of music I want to listen to again and again. There's got to be something about it that I feel touches some aspect of my soul. Otherwise, I feel like you're selling your soul out to be packaged in some way. And again, even if something somebody produces isn't perfect in that kind of a glossy, marketed kind of a sense, it still is something that's very real. It's like something that's authentically coming from a space. And real creativity, I think, comes through us. It's not something that belongs to us, okay? Now, that gets to go back to the idea of Eris again, okay? Now, Eris was brought up in the context of it happened to be an astrological thing that I caught about, and it happened, and I'm not going to get into this subject, but it was in Trump's chart. Eris is actually squaring Trump's Venus, right? And what that potentially could have mean for him in the election. But Eris has this kind of chaotic way. But I think we tend to think of it the wrong way round, because we tend to think of chaos as something that is going to destroy everything. It's going to be disruptive in a way that's going to bring everything crashing down. And when we think about, I think about in Greek mythology. Okay, so that's where Eris comes from. It's not where Hesiod talks about Eris. And he doesn't have anything really nice to say about her in the Theogony. Look at all the things she created, like strife and this and that. And blah, blah, blah. He talks a lot about Eris. And I do talk about Eris in Death and the Maiden. She's one of the first figures I address when I talk about Greek mythology and the feminine. But Eris tends to be, she this one who comes in and who creates disorder. We tend to think of the divine as having to do with bringing order. And our whole way of dealing with things is about order. When we say, okay, there's going to be a logical structure to this project, and we're going to start from point A, and we're going to end at point, D, or whatever it is, however many steps you have. And everything's got to be logic and practical. And the thing is, yes, logical and practical feels nice, because it feels like we have some control over the situation. And what we don't like about chaos is it throws elements in that we're not expecting, and if we've got, like, this nice, neat little set of steps, this can throw us off. It's I've gotten 5 steps forward and now I pulled the 7 steps backward card. It's chaotic. It seems random, and it's something that we spend a lot of time, I think, trying to conquer or trying to overcome this feeling of chaos. So when we think about Eris, you're thinking about chaos as a feminine force, right? It's this idea of something that comes in and that and it's really kind of the true underpinning of everything is chaos. I think that was kind of Lovecraft's point with his stories, was that, you're in a universe that, well, of course, his vision's kind of bleak. It's like, yeah, you're in a universe with forces that can crush you and don't care about you. That was kind of his vision. It was kind of very bleak. But there is this idea that there's a chaos that underlies everything. And certainly like chaos magic and things like that. There's an idea that how do we live within that chaos? We're spending all of our time trying to impose order on chaos. How do we live within chaos? And I feel like that's part of what is being churned up here in the current culture, and not just in the USA. I think it's happening elsewhere. I think when you start moving towards authoritarianism, this is the idea that you are trying to impose more and more order. But the thing about it is this: the more and more rigid you become, the more and more it almost kind of starts to circle around and go to the other side. The more you go to the right, eventually you kind of come around to the left. And, you have these things where you can kind of go off the deep end in terms of conformity and control and things like that. And oftentimes it's not necessarily, the center of it may be very chaotic, but it's about imposing kind of the veneer of it sounds like it's very, very strong and very forceful, and we're going to keep things down and keep them in their place. But actually that's almost like, it's like the zombies are at the gate and you're frantically trying to like keep the doors closed. It's like you're trying to put up kind of these artificial barriers to chaos in some way. So that's why I think it's interesting that there's this squaring effect that's going on there, and what that potentially could mean. But there's been a lot of talk about that. There's been a lot of talk about what these influences mean. So it got me thinking a lot about chaos. I mean, thinking about creativity and thinking about chaos. I have a school where I said, okay, I want you to do a creative project. Now, the creative project can be anything anybody wants. I'm not saying like, oh, it must be a paper, or it must be a written piece, or it must be a piece of art. It's whatever media speaks to you, whatever media, like whatever the narratives, like whatever wants to be expressed through you. That's fine. That's what we'll work with. And the person who is evaluating it, the academic who's evaluating it, is not evaluating it to tell you, to criticize you. I mean, they can say to you, well, okay, depending on what you want to do with it. Okay, if you say, okay, well, I want it for this milieu, we might say, oh, okay, well, if you're going to use it for this, I advise that you do X, Y, and Z. But ultimately, the person can do what they want. This is not. It's supposed to be more open as a school. There's a structure, but the whole point of the structure is to see, it's experimental. What kind of seeds can we plant? What's different? What's new? Now, I wanted to go back and look at something from the Principia, because this came into my head the other night, and of course, obviously, I have my copy here. So they talk about the birth of the Erisian movement here, and these are they were saying 2 young Californians, later known as Omar Ravenhurst and Malcolm the Younger, were indulging in their habit of sipping coffee at an all-night bowling alley and solving the world's problems. And somebody says, solve the problem of discord and all of the problems will vanish. Indeed, chaos and strife are the roots of all confusion. And then, of course, there's the whole, first I must sprinkle you with fairy dust. And then all of a sudden, everything freezes, and they have this vision of this chimpanzee who comes out and says to them, he says, gentlemen, why does Pickering's moon go about in reverse orbit? Gentlemen, why are there are nipples on your chests? Do you give milk? And what, pray tell gentlemen, is to be done about Heisenberg's law? He's paused. Somebody had to put all of this confusion here. And I love that, because that kind of came into my head, because I think about Greek philosophy, and I think about the philosophers who try, and even in religious studies, like when you try to rationalize religion, it becomes this whole thing of, well, somebody put all this order here. How many times have you heard that? I remember being in religion class and somebody, like the whole idea of the prime mover and the first cause, right? Somebody had to put all this order here. So it's hilarious, because it's like, somebody had to put all this chaos here. Somebody had to put all this confusion here. And then we get into the whole idea of Eris, goddess of chaos, Discordia. And of course, they have their vision of Eris. You can decide whether it's drug-induced or not, but But she says, I've come to tell you that you are free. Many ages ago, my consciousness left man, that he might develop himself. I returned to find this development approaching completion, but hindered by fear and misunderstanding. You have built for yourself psychic suits of armor, and clad in them your vision is restricted, your movements are clumsy and painful, your skin is bruised, and your spirit is broiled in the sun. I am chaos. I am the substance from which your artists and scientists build rhythms. I am the spirit with which your children and clowns laugh in happy anarchy. I am chaos. I am alive, and I tell you that you are free. Okay? So I love that, because even though, yeah, you can say what you want about this work, because, like, is it a religion disguised as a joke? Is it a joke disguised as a religion? Certain people who we know of, like Robert Anton Wilson, for example, who seems to have some responsibility for this work, we know that these are not people who, these are people who are visionary in their own way. I mean, again, you can have your different opinion about their ideas, but their whole point is just like, well, you know, we're not telling you something that you have to accept as dogma. That's the idea. This is not about dogma. You are free. And a lot of people don't want to be free because you think freedom means without structure. Chaos kind of breaks the structure down or shows you the absurdity of the structure, right? And so that's what I just think is so interesting right now. I feel like when there's a talk about a collective dark feminine that seems to be coming in, and again, however you want to interpret that, I mean, ultimately, we will see in the next coming weeks, months, whatever, how that shakes out. But the idea of a chaotic force that comes in, or a force that sets you free, I think that's really what it's about. It's about what is going to set you free. What is going to keep you from feeling confined? What's going to keep you from feeling afraid? What's going to keep you from feeling that you are a victim or a scapegoat or a prisoner of some kind? If you go back to Philip K. Dick's idea that the empire never ended, okay, and this notion that the Roman Empire somehow keeps repeating itself over and over again in some way, it gets me. I think about the idea of Sol Invictus, right? This was the emperor as deity, and it's a concept I think that informed at least where Christianity went as a political force, right? The Sol Invictus, like you have the Holy Roman Emperor. You know, you have this idea of, and Sol Invictus, of course, is the unconquerable sun. This is the one who's victorious, and that concept comes out of many different ideas that were in the Roman Empire at that time. And you just have to read the PGM, the Greek Magical Papyri, which is available as a translation, by the way, for people who don't know about it. But if you look at all the syncretism that's there in the spells, where you have this kind of idea of Egyptian magic and Babylonian magic, and you know, whatever might have come out of the Greek or the Roman, all these different systems that sort of come together and get kind of mixed up in this in terms of what's trying to be, what people are trying to manifest there. It's the way in which all of these, when you have an empire, when you have a place where you have a diversity of people from different backgrounds, with different beliefs, with different things, how does that end up coming together? I mean, we talk a lot now about appropriation and about, you know, I think we need to watch out for notions of cultural purity, because I don't think any such thing exists, except maybe in, you know, jungles that have been undiscovered yet, you know, which I don't know if there are any, but, you know, those tribes maybe are pure and untouched in that sense. Everything else has been touched by something else. That syncretism is kind of a normal part of what we do, even if we like to think that, that's why I think it's ridiculous when we're talking about, like, even if I go back to talking about the Morrigan, for example, the idea that I'm going to go back and find a pure type of Morrigan worship somewhere. There's no such thing. It doesn't exist. We don't even know what it looked like at the time. And it seems to me she was a goddess that was around long before the Celts. So we don't even know what that means. There's nothing written down. There's nothing to show us. So we tap into those currents and those frequencies, and we do what we feel we need to do with them now. And that's where I think true creativity comes in. It's an allowing that to pass through us. But it doesn't, like a lot of things that seem to be kind of anomalous and not follow an orderly pattern, I think it's something that we kind of have to let it do its thing. We always kind of want to put it in a box and say, no, well, it has to be done this way, and it has to be done by this date, and by this time, and in this way, and it doesn't tend to work like that. So I do wonder about a world where we move more into a space of the feminine. What does that mean? Well, it seems to me we're not as focused on money and making money. It's not that money has ceased to become important. I mean, there's a lot of people who are predicting that in the future, maybe there's going to be changes to our economic systems. I mean, we'll see how that goes. But certainly, and I brought this up before, since COVID, we're definitely seeing this idea of, hey, maybe I don't need to sit in an office and work 80 hours a week. You know, I mean, they're trying to kind of go back to that, but people are like, well, no. Like, when I was at home, it's like, wow, I had a life, and I could go for a run in the morning before I could start work, and I could spend time with my family, and I could do things. Like, it's like, oh, look at that. There's a life that's outside of, there's a life outside of the office. There's a life outside of making money. But we still struggle with the idea that we are somehow a lazy or shiftless or useless person if we're not striving to make as much money as we can all the time. Oh, you have a creative impulse? Oh, okay, well, how are you going to market that? How are you going to put that out there? Now, there's no reason you can't, but for me, I'm just like, okay, yeah, I mean, I might put something out there for people and sell it, but it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm going to put this out and I'm going to become a multimillionaire doing this. Well, no, I'm not. I'm just putting it out there. I have to eat, so yeah, I pay my mortgage, so yeah, I mean, I do sell things, but it's not the center focus. Sometimes you have to leave that empty space and just kind of let things go and let them do what they're going to do. If we move into a new space and, it's like if you move into a house and you got to cram it with all this shit automatically, you're not allowing it to turn into something new or to become something new or see what the potential of it is. We always that's the feminine. Even if you're like a Thelemite, you think of Nui as being kind of this feminine possibility, and you think about Hadi as kind of this the manifestation energy, right? And so the manifestation energy, even in the tarot, that's you have the High Priestess, which is kind of this amorphous kind of possibility, kind of very Piscean energy, versus the Magician, which is somebody who actually makes something manifest and in form. And you need both halves of that. It's not that one is better than the other. But sometimes we're rushing in to manifest something and we just throw a template on over the old way, or we put a template over it of what we think is going to sell, or what we think is going to be what people want. Like, we're not focused enough on what's trying to come through and too worried about, is this going to please other people? So you've got almost two things that are going on there. It's like the people-pleasing aspect of it, and you've got the this kind of capitalistic marketing, money-making side of it as well. And the idea that we have to repeat patterns that we did before. I think when you're in a new space, and especially when you're in the space of chaos, so to speak, then you're in a space where you're trying to it's like you're trying to birth something new. You're trying to figure out something different. You're trying to maybe do things that don't go together. That's always been one of my favorite things. I always love it when people try to mash up and put together things. It's like, okay, let's just put this with this, and they're clearly two things that just don't belong together at all. But the results could be absolutely hilarious. And that kind of gets to the idea too that not everything we need to do in life has to be important. Okay. What does it mean to be important anyway? What's your definition of important? Once we have dealt with the means of survival, what we need to have a roof over our head, to have clothes on our back, to have food, to whatever our basic needs are, then it's like we have the space to create. And sometimes even in the space when I think a lot of times we have so much fear around, but if I do this, I'm not going to make the money, and then I'm going to be poor and I'm not going to be able to do this, right? Like we struggle with that. We struggle with the back and forth of that. But I don't know. I think when we talk about the chaotic feminine, the Erisian feminine that's kind of moving into this space in some way, or that's going to impact us in some way, or even if you don't want to look at Eris, even if you just want to talk about the dark feminine more generally, if you want to talk about Lilith energy, this energy of we're equal here. I'm not going to submit. I'm not going to be. It's certainly astrologically that's an element of rebellion that one has there. But the rebellion doesn't mean it's not about picking a side necessarily. It's about what's emerging, and what do we do with what's emerging? How do you work with what's emerging? I think that's something initiations are supposed to teach us too. It's kind of like, okay, you have an ordeal here. What are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this unexpected thing that's thrown itself in your face? And I mean, it could be something that's very, very funny. It could be something that's very, very frustrating. But whatever it is, how are we going to figure out what we're going to do here with this energy and with this information? So it's how do we work with how do we flow with what's there? Like, I'm seeing a whole lot about flow, and there's a whole lot about operating from a heart space. And certainly, if we kind of look back to this, I mean, really, Eris is about like, well, you're free and you should be joyful. You should be joyful. They talk about the curse of Greyface, right? Greyface is the one who thinks everything's serious and everything's sober, and everything is sad and gloomy and just and not good, and we should be afraid, and it's not safe to leave our little box. And then they have the the Erisian magician who jumps up and down on one leg and gobbles like a turkey, right? Because it's just like, just stop being so serious about all of this. We end up culturally getting to a place where we are because we assign something to it instead of allowing ourselves to kind of roll with the chaos. And instead of allowing ourselves to in order to, at least in terms of our creativity, we always feel like there's this set of rules that's going on all the time, or that there's this specific box that we have to be in terms of what we're doing. And I think where the freedom comes in there is to say, no, you're actually free. You don't have to follow this template. You don't have to do it according to this box. You can do things differently. But we are so mind conditioned that we privilege our intellect over everything else. And that's kind of the work that I do on the other channel. It's like, let's not forget that there's this other space, that we have other faculties. We have intuitive faculties. We have instinctive faculties. We have our emotions. We have things that teach us that, that there's more ways to gain information about the world than just what's in our head and what's in front of us with our eyes. And even our regular five senses sometimes can teach us more things than we allow them to. We don't. I think the Black Goddess and the Sixth Sense by Peter Redgrove. That's a great book that really delves into the way in which all of our senses can teach us something, but we tend to get stuck in this space where this is the only thing that counts. What I see is the only thing. What I see with my eyes is the only thing that counts. What I think with my head is the only thing that counts. And that's what I think we mean when we say we're getting outside of a masculine space and we're getting into a more feminine space. I had spoken about, and again, I don't know if I'm being repetitive here because I say things in places and I don't remember where I've said them, but when we talk about Heinz's dilemma, Carol Gilligan talking about Heinz's dilemma and the school-age children who undergo basically psychiatric, it's like a little psychiatric test or psychological test to see what their maturity level is. And so they're presented with the question, okay, Heinz is a man whose wife has cancer. She needs medicine, but he can't afford it. Should he steal the medicine or should she die? Okay. And the boy will say, well, I think, maybe he shouldn't steal, if he stole the medicine, I think a judge would understand because the pharmacist could get more medicine, but he couldn't get another way. Like, he's working within the rules and trying to work within the structure. The girl says, well, okay, really neither thing. He shouldn't steal it, and he shouldn't have to let his wife die. Like, maybe people can raise money and pay for it, And they thought that her maturity level was a full level below the boys. This was Amy and Jake. Amy's a full level below Jake because she's actually thinking outside the box and saying, well, why does it have to be an either-or proposition? And I think that's what this chaotic energy is trying to say. Like, let some chaos in. Empty your space out. Stop thinking that everything has to be a certain way or has to follow a certain pattern or has to